Hey guys, welcome to Tea with Anais, and this is Please Give Poetry a Chance. So, for this one, I am going to be using Reishi caffeine-free peppermint, both soothing and comforting. This is organic herbal tea, fancy. It actually tells me to steep at 200 degrees Fahrenheit for 4 to 5 minutes. I've got my water here. I had already boiled it, and then I let it cool down a bit. I don't know, I don't have a thermometer in there, so one can only guess at the temperature of the water, but whatever. Oh wow, it smells good. Okay, so, and it goes, and I love this tea bag itself, it's really pretty. Anyway, go, get her done. I'm trying to get it to go in there. Okay, so, today, the discussion, the thing that I'm going to talk about is Please Give Poetry a Chance. I shamelessly am taking this again from JD Estrada. He is one of my very dearest friends, so I feel confident that he doesn't mind, and we both feel very passionately about poetry. And I think, you know, that should be evident because we both write it, so it only stands to reason. But here's the thing. So I didn't realize how divisive poetry was. And I think that maybe partially it's because a lot of people have these bad experiences in school and college about it. And I didn't go to a traditional high school, and I didn't go to a university. So I didn't have instructors telling me that I was interpreting things wrong and that I'm not deep enough to get something, and, you know, otherwise killing my passion for poetry. I spoke to a relative who is younger in middle school, and he was forced to write a poem, and he didn't like it very much, and he didn't like the feedback he received, which is terrible, you know? I think it's really important, if you are teaching, to nurture, you know, that's kind of the job, is to take somebody and instill that passion for learning into them. So it breaks my heart that some people have had this experience where their desire to learn and grow and create has been stomped on. I mean, I've definitely had my share of that. I did go to traditional school at times during my development. I did have a teacher once who told me that I couldn't write, and it could have really devastated me, but I was a very stubborn sort of person, and I respect her opinion already, so it didn't cut as much as it could have. But how dare somebody do that? So that's kind of like right off the gate how I feel about that. So let's get to the poetry, which is really the thing. So basically, put down anything that people have told you about poetry and the way that they made you feel about it, which is really breaks my heart. You shouldn't feel bad about it. And however you interpret the poetry is how it can be. You know, you don't need somebody else's interpretation. It doesn't really matter one fig what somebody else thinks. So, getting to it. For me, Leonard Cohen is one of the greatest poets. He is a songwriter, and he wrote, you know, books and books of poetry, beautiful poetry, and it just fuses poetry and music together. And for me personally, that's how it is. My earliest poetry is probably lyrics and honestly the Bible. I was raised in a very conservative religious home, and the Psalms is poetry. A lot of the Bible can be construed as, you know, narrative poetry, and so yeah, like, it's poetry. There you go. So Leonard Cohen, for me, when he said, when they asked me to repent, I asked them what they meant, or something like that. Let me just make sure I'm quoting him properly, because that was, for me, I can't even believe that I've dimmed on that. When they said repent, I wondered what they meant. Okay, yes. So in the song The Future by Leonard Cohen, he has these lyrics that just blew me away. And I was probably, I'm gonna say I was 17 when I heard this. I was living on, away from my family. I'd already moved out, and I had a roommate or someone like that who showed me the song. And when they said repent, 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 I wondered what they meant. So for me to go from that narrative to this narrative is like, yeah. And that rhythm in all of his work, that beautiful musicality, it just sweeps me up, and I just love it. The rhythm, the fusion of just real gritty human life experiences, politics and love and relationships and all these very nuanced things with spirituality, as he saw it and as he experienced it in a very kind of confessional diary sort of way. That is probably my biggest influence for my own writing, is Leonard Cohen. It was like when I heard him, his voice, that deep gravelly voice saying these words, and it didn't really matter what other people thought. He was going to examine himself and the way that he reacted so that he could maybe react differently. And he held himself accountable in his music and his poetry. Time and time again, he held himself up to an ideal. And I love that theme. I love that theme of change and growth and seeing potential and saying, you know what, here I am, I need to be here, let's keep going. And just this wry sense of humor. There's so much where you're reading it, it's like a punch to the gut, right? It's so emotional, so much pathos, it's just pain. And then you reach the end of a phrase and he throws it in your face and laughs at it. And laughs right in the face of that painful, painful thing. I think that that's a very healing way of being. And so it just influenced me not only in my way of thinking, but definitely for what I want to, my message and how I bring it together with that beat. So for him, I think that he's really easy to read too. It's not something where you're going to read about the flowers and describing the flowers for 10 pages and you just want to die. I hate that kind of poetry. And that's a behemoth little phrase from me, but that's not the type of poetry that speaks to me, I should say. And if it speaks to you, that's great. I love it. I want you to find whatever speaks to you. That was actually one of the things that I did take away from my parents. My dad said, keep looking until you find the thing that speaks to you. And you might try so many things, like hundreds of things, and you might not like any of them, but the fact is, if you try it, if you experience it, then you'll know. And I did try a lot of things, and I read that flowery stuff, and it didn't speak to me, but this gritty, wry sense of humor laced with pain speaks to me. And I think that it can speak to a lot of people. I think that that's kind of evident because he's a very popular singer-songwriter. Okay, that's Leonard. So moving right along, Francesca Lia Bloch. She was also a poet. She writes a lot of things. She writes novels. She is a prolific writer. But this is talking about poetry. So we're going to talk about her narrative poetry works. And she also just has books of poetry as well, I believe. But for me, I'm going to address the one of the books that really spoke to me personally with her was Psyche in a Dress, and that is a retelling of a myth in a narrative poetry way. And so narrative poetry is where it's all in this beautiful poetry, but it tells a story, the beginning, the middle, the end, just like a prose story, but it's in poetry. And the thing about her is that she always uses Los Angeles as another character. The setting comes alive, and I've only been to Los Angeles one time, and certainly not when I started reading her work, but she paints this beautiful, gritty, but, you know, there's blossoms and flowers, and, you know, there's so much beauty in the exterior that you have to kind of work your way out to get to it and to appreciate it, and then to become kind of more like the setting by the end of the book. You know, it's like you take a hero's journey from the beginning to becoming more like LA, which is very interesting. Of course, that's my interpretation. She might have a totally different interpretation as the author, and somebody else might have a totally different interpretation, yet they might just look at the examination of relationships between people. So it doesn't matter. It's not wrong. It's just what you get out of it. And that's what I got out of it. I got out of it that there are places out there that are completely different than the one that I was born into. Completely 180, just different, even more degrees than 180, just so different. And that's not wrong. There is a whole world out there. So I think that that's, for me, that was the theme I got out of the poetry, and I love that theme. So then we're gonna go to Baudelaire. Baudelaire is a poet that I think that most of these people have a darkness to them that I'm drawn toward, because that's what speaks to me. I like that darkness. I like the grittiness. I like the humor. And so with Baudelaire, his works are so full of gorgeous phrases that I just kind of look at them and wow. And I have to take them in. I have to read Baudelaire slower than I read some other people because I really want to experience each phrase. And we couldn't be more different, Baudelaire and myself. He had a totally different life. But I think that no matter what horrible thing you think, especially if it's something about depression, like I think that Baudelaire, a lot of this stuff, it really speaks to you when you're depressed, for me. And that human need to be understood is such a deep thing in all people. And so it reaches across and it makes you feel like you're not alone. Makes me feel that way. But Baudelaire is just a wonderful poet. His phrases are just blow me away time and time again. And I like that he's a bit shocking sometimes. At least shocking for me, for my sensibilities. I like that. Which brings me to Dante. What can you say about Dante? He wrote a friggin' masterpiece. Just a masterpiece, and it's a narrative poem. So you're getting an entire story as you're reading these poems. It's building and building to this story that just is incredible, and a story that you can read one time in your life and then get something out of it, and then 10 years later read it and get something else out of it. And for me, Dante is just, that's everything that I love about narrative poetry. Because any one of those pieces, when I read it, if I just open it and I read part of it, I like that part. But then when you read it all together, it blows my mind with how good it is, and it fills my dreams. It will make me dream about that world, which is so neat. Just really cool. And then we're going to talk about J.D. Estrada. So J.D. is a very modern poet. Him and Francesca Leo Bloch are the only two on my list that are living poets. And JD writes poetry that I just tear through. I mean, I can sit down with a little bit of whiskey or some wine and read a book in one night, and then there's phrases that stick with me, that move like music. And some of those phrases I love so much that I've made them into little art pieces, really, you know, like I put the little quote with some artwork. And there's so much to be said for somebody who can have lines like that, where even outside of the context of the poem, those lines just call to you and speak to you. And it's really cool because it's another, I guess the theme for me with all of these poets is that they make you feel like whatever your condition is, you're not alone. Because, you know, the joy, I always feel like happiness for me is the hardest to capture, the hardest to write, because it's so complicated. Happiness is a complicated emotion. Pain, that can be complicated as well, but maybe I'm more familiar with going through the layers because that's what I usually tend to write about. But with happiness and joy, that multi-layered happiness, that is difficult to capture. And I feel like J.D. Estrada, he captures that. And so I am really impressed by that. I'm impressed by the ability to capture moments that are so full of joy, that are meaningful and deep and connective, that connect one person to another person. Maybe for me, that's like the thing that I struggle with the most is connecting with other people. I'm definitely a very introverted person, and I don't connect very readily, but his books are so full of those connections where he can make human connections with other people and empathize. And so it kind of is a mirror, and it holds that up and it says, okay, this is what you want. This is where you want to head. You want to go in a direction that can be joyful and complicated in that joy and connecting with other people. And so for me, that's a very powerful thing. And that's what you can get out of poetry. You can have a mirror held up to you, and in 5 lines, reflect back to you what you need, what's lacking, and the potential. And it's different in prose because you might need to read, 300 pages to get that feeling. But in poetry, it's immediate and it's right there, and it can hit you in the gut with it. And so give it a chance. Give it a chance to hit you in the gut. So with that, I'm going to stop rambling on about poetry, and I'm going to drink the rest of this lovely tea. I hope that you have tea too, and I'll talk to you next time. Goodbye.